But there was a moment for 17 years that I believed in things that I was lied to about. And there was a long period of my adult life that I participated in some really horrific things that my government made me do.
He's not your lawyer, but he's our lawyer.
Welcome to the third episode of Not Your Lawyer, Josephine. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
You know, I'm kind of in recovery from yesterday's escapades with Greg.
I love that you jump right into it. Can you tell us exactly what happened yesterday?
Greg Stoker and I decided that, along with Al, who was a Vietnam veteran, decided that we were going to interrupt Pete's hearing at the Armed Forces Committee hearing in order to let them know that, you know, we don't agree with what they're doing and there are veterans that are speaking out.
And how did that go?
They flocked to us. The police flocked to us so very quickly to get us out of there. But I think it was really impactful. And one thing that I'm really excited about is there were probably about 100 Navy SEALs inside of that room. And Medea and myself ended up making friends with some of them.
Amazing.
Who have, since that happened on social media, have spread support for us.
That is amazing.
I thought so too.
Medea being the person that's running Code Pink.
Yes.
And Greg Stoker being the veteran who's been very active on social media against everything.
Yes.
Well, you know, for the audience members that don't know anything about you, can you tell us a little bit about your history? I love that you identify yourself as a human and you tell people to wake up.
Say, wake up your neighbor.
Wake up your neighbor. That's the line I saw on your social media. I thought it was very interesting, right? That's because it's small, it's to the point, it's local, it's manageable, it's doable, and it's focused on solution based.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Louisiana, specifically on the Bayou. I am a Cajun French woman. And those who don't know about the history of the Cajuns, we actually were exiled and ethnically cleansed out of Nova Scotia in the late 1700s by the British and put on ships. My ancestors were put on ships, and that's how we ended up in Louisiana, because at the time Napoleon controlled the territory there, and he had sympathy for the Acadians who came from France way back. And so he let us off this ship there, like my ancestors. So that's how I ended up there. And I've always been a rebel. It's in my DNA.
Yeah, well, clearly.
Honestly.
Growing up then, was there anything that shaped you or inspired you to go this military route?
Yeah, my dad was a veteran.
Oh, no way. Where did your dad serve?
He joined in 1962. So this is during the Vietnam era. And he didn't necessarily want me to go into the military, but my dad was a disabled veteran and we lived in poverty because the financial compensation for veterans is so like undercut that it's not like a survivable wage. And so I lived in poverty, and so joining the military was sort of like an option for me because I wouldn't have been able to afford college.
Very interesting. So it was in part a survival mechanism as much as anything else.
Yeah, both of my parents didn't graduate high school, and I knew that not only was I going to graduate high school, I wanted to be the first person in my family to get a bachelor's degree, and so I did that too. And then I wanted to be the first one to get a master's degree, so I started doing that. And I was like, maybe I'll be the first one to get a PhD. Might as well do that too. I think I'm going to get a PhD in studies in the historical context of what happened in Palestine. I'm going to probably do that.
Very cool. That's pretty amazing.
So, well, the goal is to resist this like oppression that has been put on like my family line. You know, my dad and mom didn't graduate high school, not because they didn't want to, but because there was still a level of survival happening with the Cajuns just up until my parents' generation in Louisiana.
Very interesting. So then what values and principles could you identify that through your brought up with your family you've carried with you to date?
I mean, I would probably say that in this moment in time, since I have been, I guess, more awakened to the reality of what my country has participated in, I probably align more with the values of my people, the Cajuns. But there was a moment for 17 years that I believed in things that I was lied to about. So, you know, like I'm not perfect. And there was a long period of my adult life that I participated in some really horrific things that my government made me do.
So your role in the military, prior to joining the military, had you envisioned military as your future? Was there any other career or passion that you had that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I knew that I always liked to be like around people and especially children. And so I actually had started going to college to be a speech pathologist.
No way.
Specifically for children with disabilities. And so that was my original like desire, but like I said, like I couldn't afford college, and so I joined the military, and then it just kind of took me into another direction.
Where did you go to undergrad?
University of Maryland Global Campus.
No way. And what did you major in?
Criminal justice.
No, I'm a criminal justice major as well.
I wanted to be attorney. I thought I would do, my direction changed to wanting to be a criminal defense attorney. And that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, I studied a lot about prisoners getting released and like reintegrating into society. And I wanted to be more a part of that. And I thought if I would be able to first do this, I'd understand more about, like the psychology behind like criminal offenses, the like economic reality behind criminal offenses, and I wanted to help reintegrate people. So that was a goal. Like it always ends up being kind of serving this oppressed community.
Yeah, and it absolutely is.
And then I'm doing it now too. So
right.
Full circle.
How old were you when you ended up joining the military?
18.
Okay, so you did 17 years in the Army, and I understand I was as an intelligence officer.
Yeah, well, actually, I was a combat medic first, and then I became an intelligence officer.
Were you deployed?
I have not been in country, but I did do a mobilization called Operation Enduring Freedom from a cybersecurity kinetic effects type.
What does that entail?
Well, basically, cybersecurity has become like a war function. So in the military, we have 7 war functions, and it's just like intelligence, logistics, artillery. It's basically this list of things that allow you to have a successful operation. And now we have this new capability, which is cybersecurity. So, agencies and military, they insert that into having the most successful operations. So to be as unclassified as possible, that's what I help insert that capability into operations overseas.
And you'd mentioned earlier in the interview that you have a different view and perspective about the military and what our government is doing in other parts of the world. What was there a pivotal moment in your life, or an experience, or an observation, or like an aha moment where it all came together for you?
I'm not going to say like I just woke up overnight and was like hit in the face with reality. Sometimes it feels like that because especially, because it's so much. But the reality is this took several sort of situations to get me to see the truth. And it didn't happen overnight, and it happened over like a period of time, just like different situations kind of piling on each other. And for me to like the final situation be the straw that broke the camel's back, where I, without a doubt, knew that what I had participated in and what, all the other military members had participated in was a lie. We were lied to by our government. We are continuing to get lied to by our government. So, October 7th was the straw that broke the camel's back for me, and for thousands of other veterans that are realizing the truth as well. I mean, it's not just me. This is the first live stream genocide in history that we know, right? So I'm not the only one that has come to this conclusion.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day, and I cannot think of a moment in history of our species where collectively from every corner of the world, every socioeconomic status, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, some element of every single category of people have spoken up against one issue. Whether it's the suffragist movement, we're talking about race, nothing has been this exposed, nothing has been this much protested. And it's solely because of social media, in my opinion, because I think it's unnatural for us to see our young get eradicated en masse. And we've never really had the opportunity to see the gravity of the numbers.
And like what you just said, like our eyes are not meant to see this. It's unnatural.
Yeah.
But what also is unnatural is the lack of response from a lot of people who see it, but have been brainwashed to believe that their voice doesn't matter and that, there's nothing we can do about this. They are more powerful. Just that almost in and of itself has been programmed into people to just, nope, keep running on that hamster wheel. Don't get off. Don't question anything. You can't do anything. If you do something, you'll be punished for it. Keep running on the hamster wheel. So it's unnatural for us to see this. And it's also unnatural, the lack of reaction, because as human beings, we should instinctively want to react to children getting maimed and murdered the way that they are. And for that to not move someone concerns me, because what does that mean for my kids when they are going to see that happen, if that happens? Like, who's going to protect my kids?
Yeah.
There's such a connection. Like, if we make it normal for this to happen, then someone's going to do it to us.
Correct. 100%. In fact, building on the element of what feels unnatural about the situation, a lot of atrocities have happened historically, right? Which I think, frankly, have no bearing on what's happening right now, because you can't buy genocide on some type of generational trauma layaway program, right?
Yep.
Like, these people, what have they done? What are the consequences they're facing, or what are they being subjected to? But historically, I always thought, I said, well, maybe it happened because people didn't know. Maybe it happened because the news was controlled, the information was controlled. And, if we've learned anything this past year, is the person that controls the narrative controls the truth. But what does feel absolutely abnormal and unnatural about this situation is just the scale of which this has been exposed, and there is still ongoing support. Too large, right? Too significant of a population. Like, obviously, it's not even all Israelis support what's happening. We've seen a lot of Israelis protesting. A lot of young Israelis are choosing prison over serving in the IDF. There's a lot of activists like that Elon individual who posts aggressively about it. So it's obviously not all Israelis, but there's way too many. And the way they're flaunting it, the way the idea of soldiers are flaunting on Telegram, their war crimes and TikTok and Instagram, which is why, our government can't even agree that Trump lost the last election, but they agree on banning TikTok and supporting Israel, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And it does feel unnatural to see somebody urinating on dead bodies and having animals chew their dead bodies and then posting it on social media. And
but think about what you just said. Our government is having to ban a social media platform that hosts 140 million Americans. I don't know. It's
170 million.
170 million Americans, because too many of them know the truth. So what does that tell you? They are becoming desperate. They are clenching their claws into one tactic after the other. But the reality is it's over. The truth will never fit back into the box. Too many people know. And just because they live in this delusional world of their own where they keep lying to each other, the outer reality that exists in the masses is that we know the truth.
Yeah, I'm like, you're not going to lie to my children. You're not going to lie to me.
Yeah, so are you telling me I've been hallucinating? Are you telling me that things I participated in now I know the truth about? I was there. Other veterans speaking out, they participated in your war crimes, and we're witnessing you continuing to participate in war crimes. And we are saying enough is enough. No, this is not sustainable. And it's not, because our empire is falling. It's over. It's absolutely over.
Because the ability to communicate freely all of a sudden has lifted the veil.
Yes.
Which, I'll tell you something. I still do, at this point, maintain a little bit of a sense of optimism. And the optimism comes from the realization that the reason our government spends so much time, money, force in shielding the truth is because these types of acts, these inherently unnatural acts is the best way I can describe it, can only happen under the cover of darkness. Because when you zoom out, the average person, right, the military veteran, the kindergarten teacher, the lawyer, whatever, we're not comfortable with this being our reality. And so much has been normalized in this past year that is
By design. I mean, this isn't something that just happens overnight. You know, by design, we've been desensitized. I did a documentary, which I encourage anyone to watch. It's like 6 minutes, and it's a perfect explanation of how our military in the United States is indoctrinated to believe that people in the Middle East are terrorists. And it starts in basic training. It starts in the simulations that we're a part of. We are practicing to kill someone that looks like someone in the Middle East, dresses like someone in the Middle East, speaks Arabic, identifies as a Muslim. We are trained to see that list of things and our brain to automatically assume they're a terrorist. But the reality is they can't use that anymore, because the most beautiful thing that has happened is Muslims have integrated in our society in America in mass enough that a lot of people have friends who are Muslims. And so they're like, why are they talking about that? Like, my friend is Muslim, and that certainly is not, like, my friend's not a terrorist. And once that connection happens, someone's like, oh, they're lying to us. They've been lying to us, you know. And this, like I said earlier, it's the truth isn't going to fit back in a box. The biggest terrorist has been the American empire and the Israeli empire in our lifetimes.
To what end?
To what end?
You know, you said something that really hit the nail on the head, which reminded me. In Virginia, they were doing school shooter training and exercise for law enforcement. This is relatively recently. And it got out that the sample school shooters, the images of the school shooters they were using were Arabs in keffiyehs and face and scarves. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, when in the history of the United States has there been like an Islamic extremist school shooter?
Exactly. They look like the victims in these crimes that we mostly see, where the minority groups are being, and the vulnerable are being, you know, like attacked. And the shooters oftentimes are white men. That's
the biggest part of the problem. Everybody tries to create categories and eliminates. The people that are saying, you know, we don't want to be racist are being the most racist.
Yes,
because
exactly.
What they keep doing is dividing and drawing lines.
Exactly.
We're all individuals. We have our own experiences.
And evil exists among every color of skin and every like identity. You know, there is evil in Christianity. There is evil in Catholics. There is evil in, you know, Judaism. There's evil in Islam. Like, those religions don't make a person free of internal like desires that they may have to be an evil human being. And so, like, you know, I agree, like, dividing who's going to be evil based on the color of their skin and how they identify is just like ignorance, really. And
you know, so I grew up, so I was born in the United States. I'm lucky enough to be, I have a lot of arrogance about my American identity. Anybody has something negative to say about me or the way I look, I'm always like, you don't like it, get out of my country. You know, and I throw it right back.
Yeah.
And when it comes to religion, you know, I'm not the most religious person. I haven't been for a very long time. But I respect all religions. And I think they all, to whatever extent, you know, it's like, have a problem with the believer, not the faith. But over the years, growing up, especially in the line of work that I do, you know, I've represented people that have done horrible things from every socioeconomic status, profession, race, ethnicity. I have prescribed to I call it the red circle, yellow circle, green circle of belief, and which is, you know, you can be a white supremacist, you can be a Jewish supremacist, you can be an Islamic extremist, whatever the case may be. But there's a little green circle around you, right? And that green circle is you can have whatever belief you want, man. And as long as it's contained right here around you, it's up to you. That's your right. Do what you want to do. And then you have a slightly bigger circle. That's a yellow circle. And that's your family, your husband, your wife, your kids. You know, you can download some of your hard drive onto them. But it's still yellow because it allows you to try to influence somebody. You can't dictate what they do.
Yes.
And then right outside of that is a red circle. And that is whatever you have to say, think, or believe cannot in any way, shape, or form be imposed upon the person outside that red circle, cannot adversely affect that person outside the red circle.
Absolutely.
I like that mindset because all of a sudden it says, okay, You do what you have to do. You think what you have to think. And as long as it stops at that line,
I think the red line is a good representation. Like in an English word is like that red line is when you can't cause harm to another person
Correct.
because of your belief. So if you keep this ideology contained and no harm is coming to another human being, even whether it's your kids too, right? Because oftentimes we are subjected to these ideologies by our parents that end up being
look
awful.
what's happening in Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So even then, like that's this cautious line that, oh gosh, but I think that the basis of harm is probably the best way to live as a society, because I say these two things can exist at the same time. And that's like safe spaces for you and someone else that might believe how you believe, but then safe spaces for this like multi-diverse, multicultural existence. And so now you can exist next to someone else that has different identities but not cause harm to each other. And you can go back and exist kind of how you want to exist with your own little circle, and you don't cause harm to each other and or other people. And if we just are all sort of lived by this concept, our world would be a much better place.
Yeah, and it's actually a fairly simple
Is it
concept, right?
so simple?
You said something about people and how they're generally, and prior to October 7th, I did not know any Palestinians, and my focus jumping in to this issue really just became the massacres I was seeing of children.
Yeah.
Right, you can only see so many apartment buildings with unsuspecting children playing on a balcony on a rooftop, and all of a sudden they get wiped out, and you say, wait a second, something is off here. But the point I'm trying to get to is, since then, I think the world has been able to see what Palestinian people are really about. And I got to tell you, I am so incredibly impressed by their ethics, their values, their
Me too.
resilience, their ability to... You would think that they would talk about Israeli society in large in a way that, in my opinion, would be justified based on what they've experienced. Yet it's the other society, the oppressing society, that talks about them and vilifies them and makes them
Yes.
seem so evil, for lack of a better word.
Well, they have to paint that picture in order to try and convince the sheep that they're bad.
Or maybe make peace with what they see in the mirror.
Perhaps, yeah.
But it has been a really, truly wonderful experience getting to see Palestinians and seeing, we actually can be, here's an example of what society could be like.
Yes.
Be so loving, so caring, and watching them go in explosion after explosion with their bare hands, pulling their children, pieces of their family members out of the rubble,
Yeah.
knowing that another imminent strike is coming, because that's become a common practice. And still they go back, and
Yeah.
still they try to help, still they try to fight, still they pick up the orphan children. You see them walking aimlessly, and then they pull them in. And I find it shocking that out of such a dark existence and a dark experience, you have this wonderful flower of society that has blossomed. And it makes it somehow slightly more tragic that you have such a wonderful people that is being eradicated.
I know. Well, isn't it interesting how this evil force is trying to, and I call it an evil force because I feel like if we just say the word Zionism, we actually are missing out on encompassing this evil force that existed even before the idea of Zionism, right? Because like, look at what America did to the indigenous people that lived on this continent, which was called Turtle Island. And not we necessarily me, but I guess our American ancestors that lived here before us were just as evil as the Zionists in the fact that they came in and genocided the Native Americans and left them in, like, what they did to them over the years is exactly what we're seeing now. And so this evil force understands that it cannot win with people like the Palestinians and people like us, really. We're not letting them win because they haven't convinced us, or they did, but it wasn't enough for us not to wake up to the truth. We still were curious enough to find out what's actually going on. And that, in and of curiosity, is how you beat the evil that exists, because the minute someone becomes curious enough to research and Google things, it's over, because it's all the information exists. And all it takes is planting curiosity for someone to say, you know what? Maybe the way I think about this might not be right. Let me see. Google. Oh, wow, that happened. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, I've been totally duped, totally lied to. I was a sheep.
It's really wild that you say that. So I had a very close Jewish circle growing up. It's just my colleagues, my mentor, my friends, and I didn't know that all of them were, or most of them were Zionists. I didn't even know what Zionism meant. Like I was told that to be a Zionist meant that you support the state of Israel. In my mind, I was like, well, Israel exists, so it's cool. In fact, this is the first time I'm saying this on camera, like 10 days before October 7th, or like 2 weeks before October 7th, I made a video about something entirely unrelated. And one of the examples I gave was, I know Israel had cleansed a part of Palestine a long time ago, but does it mean I shouldn't respect or their advancements in technology, like all the progress they've made? Like it was a pro-Israeli snippet that I had made. That's where my mind was. And it wasn't until October 7th where I started seeing the buildings drop. But I remember very distinctly, like watching Instagram video after Instagram video or TikTok video after TikTok video of just buildings dropping, where I was like, wait, this
Filled with people.
I did a deep dive. In 1 week, I read about 22 human rights reports from Amnesty, Save the Children, UN, UNRWA, Lancet report. And I was like, how are these public reports? There was an Amnesty International report from like 2017, which was called like water terrorism or water on water, something like that. And then I'm like, how did you cut off another entity's food, water, and electricity? Like, how do you have the authority to do that? This is a separate entity.
And the world doesn't even know about it.
And then you zoom out, you're like, holy shit, this
They're
has been
just
happening this whole
getting-
time. It's just been shielded from our eyes.
Yeah. And it doesn't just happen in Palestine.
No.
The influence that the Israelis have, that ideology, this colonial ideology that the Israelis and our own government have, is like affecting indigenous communities all over the world. The Palestinians, what makes this a lot different is they are resisting it to a point of sacrificing everything to have a future of self-dignity and, just like basic human rights. Like they don't even have basic human rights. So at what point, how long are you willing to live like that? You can exterminate the children, you can exterminate the families, but you're not going to exterminate this idea that a human being has, that they deserve at least the very basic survival human rights, like food, shelter, water. Like they don't want to be imprisoned in this 25, square mile place. They want to travel. That's basic human
They have the right.
They have a
to
right
live
to
in peace and with some dignity.
Exactly, with dignity. That's exactly correct. So, this resistance that exists is not going away, and it's growing because, you said even this little detail you had in your head 10 days before October 7th, that's just one layer. My layers might look different than yours because I have a different experience. So I'm in the military 17 years. So the layers I've been exposed to, the brainwashing I've been exposed to, looks different than yours. My layers look different, and it's going to take different things to peel them like an onion. You start questioning all the layers, like peeling things back. And if we keep doing that, like to the human beings, especially Americans,
I think about a lot of Americans the way I used to think about North Koreans.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, where I'd be like, well, how can you believe that he did 8 hole-in-ones in a game of golf? How can you believe that, he's the strongest person, the fastest person? And I would never mock him, never, but just because growing up in the profession I'm in, I've realized that, you can't blame a flat earther when his parents are flat earthers, his neighbors are flat earthers.
Yeah.
Like that's just the world that person knows. But I would think that, man, it's amazing that in this day and age, somebody can be so brainwashed. And the irony of it is, I was actually looking in a mirror.
Yes.
My facts were different.
Yeah.
Right. That's it. But I was in the exact
That's
same
right.
situation.
Yeah.
So that's why I think conversations like this are so important, and I'm so inspired.
We never know we never know who's listening, where it's the exact thing they needed to hear to say, wait a second, let me actually think about that a little bit more. You never know who we're going to reach through our voice and our experience. And that's why I always say everyone's voice is so powerful, because someone I am speaking to may not hear me because they don't relate to me, but they might relate to you. And so you speaking about your experience may be the one that they needed to hear. And so every single voice is so powerful. For me, it's powerful in the veteran community and the military community.
Absolutely.
And as a mother and a Christian, it's powerful in those communities. But there are communities I'm not in that I can't, my experience doesn't allow me to speak to, that other people are, so like, former state diplomats that are speaking out right now, like they have a different experience working in that sector of our government that I just, don't have. I've been in more of the intelligence part of our government, which is in a way similar, but in a way it's really different because they look at policies, foreign policies. My experience, I'm on the back end of that. The foreign policy has been decided, and in the military, we're just carrying out a mission, not really involved in the creation of the policy. We're just like, this is the decision the commander has made at the top, and then we're carrying out, what they desire.
I do hope that there's somewhat of an awakening within the military in general, because, growing up, it was everything we heard. I've never served in the military, but growing up, you hear talk about courage and honor and loyalty. Integrity. And then also, don't ask a single question, do as I tell you, which in a universe where I could respect and understand, look, we have a team leader for a reason, right? We're following orders for a reason. I get that. But now when you have unambiguous, non-controversial proof that you are actually sheep and your shepherd is
a wolf in shepherd clothing.
Yeah. I like you switched that. And not only that, not doing necessarily the bidding of the leaders of our country anyway.
Yeah.
I think that I would be mortified. I would be mortified to know that I invested my time, my life, my resources fighting for the cause of some bajillionaire to get a little bit more oil or to get a little bit more money or to have another government military contract, to say like you used and abused my one life in this world for your little agenda.
Yeah, it's horrible.
That's
why you have 22 plus veteran suicides a day, because, so many veterans come to the realization that of what they participated in, and they can't live with themselves. And like, imagine that, 22 plus people a day are taking their lives, and we don't have the capacity to help them heal from what we put, our government has used them for. And I mentioned when I was interrupting this hearing, my father committed suicide, and he was a veteran. And, I mentioned I grew up in poverty, and that was a big reason why, was because he had an injury from his time in service. And instead of actually having the surgery he needed for this ruptured disc in his back, they just put him on a bunch of pain pills and like depression medicine and sent him on his way. And he couldn't hold a job. He was in pain all the time.
What a terrible existence.
And so it was just like,
I'm so sorry.
This is one, but I'm sorry about it too. Not only because of my experience with it, I'm sorry that there are thousands and thousands of experiences just like mine that exist right now. And, it's a reflection of our recruitment. We don't have the capacity to remain ready as a force because people aren't joining, and they don't want to join, and people aren't re-enlisting, which is something we don't talk about. Like, people join to get their college education and then they're getting out. There's not an incentive for them to stay in for 20 years anymore.
Like, see it as a war machine.
You're seeing less re-enlistments. You're seeing more officers resigning earlier. You're seeing these recruitment problems. And then ultimately what that leads to, when you have this war machine who doesn't want to slow down, is a draft. And then now you have these people who are sending their children,
not for honor, not for integrity.
Yeah. And we know that it's to keep your machine going. And we know that it's going to result in innocent people by the millions paying the price.
my God.
Think about it from this perspective. We are providing financial resources to a foreign country's military. Said foreign country is committing a genocide with our tax dollars. So now you're supporting a foreign country's military who also is 100% undeniably committing war crimes, violating the Geneva Conventions, and breaking international
Our
law.
own Leahy laws, yeah.
Our own laws. However, when you have someone like Pete that is getting, nominated for the Secretary of Defense position, who wrote a book that talks about violating the Geneva Convention and international laws, if we so desire, we shouldn't be told what to do on the battlefield. That's why we have these, down the road situations of veteran suicide, of, recruitment issues, of people not wanting to stay in the military, because that is not a sustainable way to function as an empire. And at some point, like, the people will rise against you. And we're seeing that actively happening as we watch our own empire fall and other global powers like rise above us.
Yeah. You said something else I didn't want to gloss over. You talked about feeling safety concerns for our children in this country, in our country. And one of the things that is bothering me is knowing that thousands of Americans are serving in the Israeli military right now, committing, in my opinion, unambiguously a genocide as well. And now they're just going to come back and become our law enforcement officers, our neighbors, our doctors, our teachers around their children who have, for whatever reason, found some mechanism of mental contortionism to justify the most barbaric harm upon the most defenseless members of our community, which is children. And how are we all as a community? This is not to any particular minority. This is to pretty much anybody that has been anti-genocide vocal, speaking out against this, who they've labeled en masse as terrorist supporters and Hamas supporters, independent of their identity. How are we supposed to feel okay and comfortable letting these people just transition back after committing the most heinous acts that we could ever imagine?
I'm not okay and comfortable with it. I actually have started a movement as well for people in the movement to address this very thing if they work with them, to send an email to their corporate HR requesting transparency if they're employing anyone that served in the Israeli forces since October 7th specifically. At least that's a starting point, and to make it very clear that they are uncomfortable working next to or with any of these people in any capacity, or even like requesting transparency from universities to say, are you going to allow these people who served during this time, to be coming to these college campuses? Those issues have to be talked about and addressed. And I'm hoping that people have the courage to do it, because otherwise the alternative is having to work with them. And that just, for me, is not an alternative. I'm not willing to do it.
Because the children that they have been eradicating with impunity look like our children, because they're just children.
Children, exactly. And I don't want them next to me. I don't.
It's tough.
It's as a mother, you wonder, like, what kind of evil exists around me? Like, and at what point, I even think about this as my government, like, they're not too far removed from being complicit in this situation. They are equally as complicit in this situation. And my political leaders also are neighbors and, leaders. And they literally are complicit in war crimes. And we're seeing Trump, who won on a anti-war campaign, I'm going to end the wars, time for peace, to now pick new ones, and his constituents, which I'm watching in comments, say, wait, what? Why are we going to do that? And so he won on like a lie. And maybe he wasn't lying at the time. Maybe he just didn't realize how significantly fast we were going to go down this trajectory of falling as an empire, because BRICS has surpassed us. That's it. I anticipate here in the next like 12 months, we'll probably see another dozen countries join BRICS. And I anticipate at some point NATO is going to almost dissolve because it's not going to be sustainable. The United Nations, I feel like, is an extension of NATO, might also somewhat dissolve, or their responsibility is going to change because clearly they have no power to do anything. It's kind of like
it's a farce.
It's like a reality show. If at this point, I've watched every meeting, by the way, emergency meeting when it came to Gaza. I have watched every single United Nations meeting. Sometimes I've watched it multiple times, and it's a joke. It's just a total joke. And so, you know, I don't know what BRICS is going to, like, you know, transition into after it fulfills its economic goals, because right now there are economic goals that it's pursuing, like a digital currency that doesn't rely on the dollar, which they are succeeding in. They have pilots that they're, you know, actively using now, and it's working. And that way countries don't have to like rely on the United States now. They have their currency. Another country has its currency, and this digital software basically converts the two currencies. And so no matter who you're doing business with, you don't rely on another country's currency. And so that's eliminating that level of power that exists right now, which is great. But then, you know, I'm not going to say that some of the countries that are joining BRICS are great. Like they too may be colonial, like imperialist, and not the best global leader either. Like there's always going to be this fight to say, let's raise our consciousness collectively as a human being so that it doesn't matter who's in power. Like we're at the very minimum not committing genocides. You know, that has to be
that could be the baseline.
The baseline. Like, can we stop the indiscriminate bombing of children? Like, can we all agree to that? Like at the very basic minimum, right?
You know, it sounds like an oversimplification, but it really is just that
simple.
So I'd like to end on a somewhat positive note. And I've, like I said, I've mentioned before how much I've seen. I've literally seen firsthand all the work that you have been doing. And you're more than putting your money where your mouth is and putting your time and effort into it. What would you recommend, or how would you suggest people in the West who have the luxury of not being bombed actively right now get involved? And what do you think, what steps that they can take that you think will have, you know, the biggest ROI in terms of making a difference?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's the $1 million question. How do you combat it? Well, at the very least, you can wake your neighbor up. At the very least, if you can't leave your home because you have kids, if you know, work 80 hours a week, which a lot of men do. I know it seems like crazy to even say that, but so many men in the middle class work that amount of overtime because they can't afford to pay their bills. So
we got to pay for this genocide. It's expensive.
Exactly. We got to pay for a genocide, and for rich people to become more rich, we have to pay for that. So the very least you can do is have conversations with your neighbors, your community, like your church. Like start actually saying, you know, I'm realizing what is going on here. And that way the solutions can come from local communities, because I can't, you know, push solutions of what we need to do down different communities' throats. They almost have to come up with their own solution that would work to stop what we're witnessing. I see it looking as like kind of community contingency plans. That's what I like to call it. Community contingency plans, where you almost approach the situation as a massive cyber attack, which is most likely coming, you know, by the way. How would you respond? How would you live without, you know, water treatment facilities? How would you live without power? How would you live without logistical supplies of a grocery store getting constantly, you know, stocked? What if 18-wheelers couldn't deliver, or rail systems couldn't function because of a cyber attack? And whatever conclusion you come to, you need to start living that way now. You need to start living as if that's going to happen. That way, when it does happen, it doesn't affect you. And a good
You're
example.
not so reliant.
Yeah, and not so reliant on the government. And when you become self-sovereign like that, by default, the government loses power. And so you look at like Amish communities, for example, and they're not perfect. No community ever will be.
Correct.
But at the very least, the government doesn't control them. And they really are against what is going on right now. You know, they agree that this level of violence is not good for even just us human beings as a species. And so to me, the biggest change and like the ending of this evil force comes with people becoming self-sovereign. And so you don't rely on the government. You don't have to pay these taxes. They only have the power when you give it.
We have the numbers.
We have the numbers. As soon as you cut the power from these corrupt politicians, live a way where you don't have to make that much money. So they don't get that much taxes. So grow your own food, have gardens, you know.
It's really funny that you said that. I know I was trying to end on a positive note, but I've made friends, Palestinian heritage and Palestinians now, and one of them was talking about how he does multiple jobs, including DoorDash, including Uber Eats, DoorDash, all that stuff, and a day job, and then having the knowledge and reality and realizing that they have to go to work, do all these 3 jobs, to then pay taxes to fund the bombing of
their own family.
relatives and family members over there, and how it's just a truly traumatizing experience. And I feel that way as someone who isn't Palestinian.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it's like to be that way. All right, well, Josie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I cannot emphasize enough how much I appreciate you taking the time. When I saw you in handcuffs yesterday on social media, I was like, well, lost that interview. I wasn't sure what the plan was.
Yeah, I mean, I like to end on a note like about this activism and this level of activism that I've been, you know, using my energy for. It's like not what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost amongst just like the communities of people who are still brainwashed. Like, oh, look how crazy this person is, or some of the things that they say. And it's like, oh, you think I want to be leaving my 4 kids to drive to DC to yell at a bunch of rich, corrupt people to stop bombing babies? Like first of all, the fact that that's what we're doing is like bananas. And number 2, the fact that this is what I'm having to do to try and stop it is also bananas.
Absolutely.
Like I'm having to yell in my military uniform. I never imagined in my life that I'd have to like put myself out there this far to say, stop killing kids.
That's wild.
Like that is literally what I'm saying. Stop killing babies. Like this is not a sustainable way to live as a society. And by you making that normal, you're making it normal for someone to do it to me. So I think that like, you know, where we are in this activism and even this podcast that we're doing right now, it's necessary to do it in our time and space and how us existing right now, we have to do it because we have to be the ones that say this is not normal.
Yeah, if you can't, you have to, when the narrative is being controlled, you have to become a part of the narrative, which is the motivation behind all of this. Mm-hmm. Josie, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.